Welcome to the Greater Central Florida Multifamily Investor Group, where we focus on investing where it makes sense. Here's your host, Ismael Ray Reyes. So Ryan is the co-manager of multiple investment funds, which specialize in investing both directly and indirectly in mobile home parks and self-storage assets and manufactured houses, representing more than 20,000 units located in more than 25 states. Ryan graduated from the University of Tampa with a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science. An athlete, he was highly recruited for both baseball and basketball and was drafted as a senior in high school by the Baltimore Orioles and again in college by the Anaheim Angels. Ryan pursued his athletic talents by playing baseball throughout his college experience. He currently serves on the board of Young Life College, UCF, University of Central Florida, and is a member of the advisory board for the National Christian Foundation's Orlando chapter. Ryan lives in Orlando with his wife and 4 children. Ryan, I turn it over to you, my friend. Thanks for being on here.
Yeah, you bet. It's good to be with everybody and good to see familiar names and some new names. I don't have much of a spiel. My wife and I have built a business and, we learned quite a bit over the years that we've been at it. And so my aim and my hope is that it's helpful to you in some way. So rather than kind of spraying and praying and just talking endlessly about things that I hope might be valuable, I think I would prefer if you just feel free to fire away and say, anyway, whatever could be helpful for you, feel free to ask and I'll be as thorough as I can.
Okay, so what we'll let folks do is ask questions on the chat. I'll tee us off. I do have, obviously this is focused on multifamily, but as it happens in multifamily, you normally want to have some other streams of alternate investments that you can get into when either multifamily gets tight or the cycle is not quite right in the places that you want to invest. So I guess my first question is talk a little bit about the major differences between mobile home parks, manufactured housing, and multifamily apartment investing. And I think hopefully that's a good question to start off with.
Yeah, I think I'm going to start with the end in mind because that's kind of the way we think about things. So, what Jamie and I, the way we view our profession and what we do for a living is we are in the business of finding $240 dollars. Every dollar a month of NOI at 5 cap is $240 in capitalized value. So and obviously there's different cap rates in different markets and asset classes, but generally speaking, we are in the business of finding $240 dollars. That's what we do for a living. So, and if y'all want me to follow up on that and explain what I mean and cap rate, we can have a whole cap rate discussion, but I guess to start it, given the value that every dollar of NOI on a monthly basis is $240 in value, we want, I think, collectively as many of those dollars as possible. Do we not? Right? If every dollar we find is worth $240 and unrealized gain, which then we can borrow 60% of conservatively and pay no tax. So 60% of 240 is, call it $150. So every dollar of NOI is $240 in capitalized value, but $150 in our pocket that is realizable in a tax efficient way. So obviously we want as many dollars as possible of those type in quality. And so when you look back over the last 20 years of net operating income growth across all asset classes in real estate, so I'll just, I guess, to kind of walk through kind of the sequence of thought, given the value of that dollar, it would make sense to me to then look at the asset classes that give you the greatest chance on a market basis of creating those dollars. Okay. So with that in mind, if you go back over the last 20 years and look at all types of asset classes across the board, the 3 best performing asset classes over the last 20 years are tied for first and second, and I'll come back to this in a second, is self-storage and mobile home parks. And then third is apartments, basically multifamily housing. Then there's malls and office and industrial and all the kind of the gamut from there. So given that mobile home parks and self-storage have over the last 20 years, just based on the data, not trying to pick a winner, or you may say, well, you really like mobile home parks and storage, so you want to make it look good. It's the opposite. The reason it looks good is the reason I chose to only buy mobile home parks and self-storage. Okay, I don't have a dog in the fight. I'm starting with the end in mind and working backwards to a degree. So in short, when you look back over the last 20 years, and this data is accessible from NAREIT, NAREIT, you can access all the raw source files, you can crunch it however you would like. But when you look over the last 20 years, the two best performing asset classes for NOI growth, net operating income growth, is self-storage and mobile home parks. The average growth rate for 20 years per year for 20 years is 4.3% for both asset classes. Now, if you look a little bit different, not different, if you look a little closer into the data, you'll see a couple of things, because then the question will probably arise, why do both? Why not just pick one of the two? Why do both? Okay. And you may not know this, but we have vehicles that acquire both mobile home parks and storage in the same vehicle. We put them side by side, so to speak. So the question is, well, why? Why not just buy storage here, mobile home parks here, and have them separate? So in short, mobile home parks and storage are very similar in ways that are additive, but they're also different in ways that are complementary. What I mean by that is, if you go back to the data I was describing and you look into the NOI growth over the last 20 years, you'll notice that mobile home parks are really steady Eddie, very consistent. Okay, so its rise over run has a lot narrower variance to how much more, how much less it moves. It's very narrow. And I'll come back to the reason why I think that's the case in just a second. But when you look at storage, storage is what we call, it's more elastic, and we call it elasticity. So what I mean by that is, storage, when it runs, it really runs. Okay, and given the value of that dollar, right? If the market was running, would we want to just let it run, right? We just want to let it run. It's nice to have something that you could have a market growth rate of 10% year over year in storage, right? That's real elastic. I'm not talking forced appreciation, I'm talking market appreciation. Now, to kind of unpack that a little bit more, the reason mobile home parks, I think, are a lot more steady Eddie is, on the surface, it's good. Just to throw some negative in the conversation for balance, if nothing else. I think there's also an element of bad. And here's my point of view on it. I think, to a degree, that mobile home parks, you're not actually able to charge what the market would actually bear if you could charge what the market would bear. The reason I say that is, if, let's say, a mobile home park, you could have it full at $1,000 a month and go from $300 a month per space to $1,000 a month. Market, you could argue, is $1,000 a month, right? Who wants to be the mobile home park owner who buys a mobile home park and raises the rents to $1,000 a month?
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be that guy or that gal. So in lieu of actually going to what market would bear, what do? You say, well, I'm going to take a path and I'm going to raise my rents 4.3% every year. And when the market goes down, you raise it because you're still behind where you otherwise would have been. Okay. So the point in all of this is kind of bringing it more current. If you were to go back a year ago through COVID and pick really any asset class you would like to own, you would probably, based on the data, you'd probably pick mobile home parks, quite honestly. Mobile home parks did terrific. However, if you were to start with January of this year and pick any asset class you'd like to own, you'd probably pick self-storage. We have actually many of our self-storage facilities where we're raising rents at least 5 times a week. There's some properties we're raising rent several times a day, which has been how hot the market has been for storage. So the point is, we like that elasticity. So why put them together? We like the backbone of predictability that mobile home parks have historically provided. We like the elasticity that self-storage adds to the mix. And to manage both of them is actually very similar. So it's easy to manage in a vertically integrated sense. And I've talked far too long without taking a breath, so I will pause now.
Well, that was good. That was very good kind of background on that. I guess, and I know you talked a little bit about sort of the negatives, if you will. I think in my view, and then correct me if I'm wrong, one of the things that with mobile home parks scares me a little bit is kind of nobody wants them in their backyard, kind of like apartments, but worse. So is the reason that it's steady Eddie is because there's not any supply that's really being injected into the system? What is the overall the root cause, if you will?
Yeah, so it actually brings that your question brings me back to the beginning of my career in mobile home parks. The reason we got into the space, and I'll tip my hat to my grandfather who taught me. There's three people I've learned more from than anybody ever in the world, and he's one of them. He was a famed investor, my mom's dad. But he was at a young age, he taught us about moats, brand moats, switching moats, first mover advantage moats, patent moats. I can go through all the different moats, but when I was in my early 20s, my wife and I got interested in mobile home parks because I thought I found a moat hiding in plain sight for free. And this is more words than is required, but maybe it's helpful. So if I were to do a certain, let's do on this call without requiring you to raise your hand, but if I were to ask, how many of you like Coke? How many of you like Pepsi? It's generally split 50-50. And the Coke people think, no, it's not. And the Pepsi people think, no, it's not, but it is roughly 50-50. Okay. Now, Coke and Pepsi have spent about $1 trillion, literally. Although $1 trillion no longer seems like a lot. It's a sad state of affairs, but Coke and Pepsi have spent nearly $1 trillion in marketing since inception of their respective companies to sway the opinion of the respondents, right? Of the people who are responding to the question, which one you like. So $1 trillion has been spent to get you to raise your hand to say, I like X or I like Y. So here's the point. With mobile home parks, if I were to ask 100% of any kind of audience, how many of you want a new mobile home park near where you live? It's 100% no. How much money did I have to spend to get that response? Zero. So $1 trillion has been spent to get a 50% effective response, and I've had to spend zero to get 100% effective response. Now, you also have to be a little twisted to see that as a positive response, but it is a positive response in that, in as much as I can buy a mobile home park and place my capital into that asset, 100% of the residents in that area will fight to keep other people from competing with my capital. And I couldn't believe that people were so kind. Right? So I looked at it as an unbelievable moat, a durable moat, a widespread moat, an impassioned moat that I didn't have to spend a penny to create. All I had to do is pick up the dollar to benefit from it and deploy my capital behind the protection. So a lot of words to get to the point. There's about 55,000 mobile home parks in the US in any given year. There's about 10 to 20 that are built out of the ground. And there's about 150 that are torn down for highest and best use. So demand year over year goes up for affordable housing. Supply of mobile home parks is going down. And mobile home parks, different than apartments, is really the best tool for fighting the affordability crisis. But we're caught in this pinch in that it's the best tool. But when you really look at it, beyond the emotive, nobody wants a mobile home park near them, what it really comes down to is tax revenue. Mobile home parks are terrible uses of land for the purpose of generating tax revenue. So, and I'm kind of, I'll give you a quick example for those who are Central Florida residents. So I'm born and raised in Orlando, grew up in Longwood. I live on the Conway chain. My office is downtown in the Citrus Center. So we're here. If you're familiar with Orlando, on the corner of, I think it's, I can't think of the cross street. I think it's Pine Lock and Orange. Call it Michigan and Orange, if you're familiar with Michigan and Orange. There was a Lucky's that recently is closed and now is becoming a Publix. There's a Starbucks right across from the Wawa on Orange, south of Michigan. 2.5 years ago, that was a mobile home park. Now it's a Starbucks and the little Greek restaurant and Publix, and it's a shopping center. there's a mobile home park, kind of a seedy mobile home park right across the way that just sold and is being redeveloped into storage. So the point is, I can just from Central Florida, from between my house and my office, there's 2 mobile home parks that'll be taken out of service in a 2-year span of time. So anyway, mobile home park supply is not increasing, it's decreasing, and demand has increased 4-fold since I got into the business. So when you have supply constrained by a stigma, you have demand increasing. What does that do to price pressure?
Yeah.
And if the price pressure goes up, that drops down to NOI, and every dollar is $2.40. That's why we like this space.
Nice.
I didn't mention this, and I kind of teased it, so I'll kind of tie it off just for fairness. One of the reasons mobile home parks provides affordable solutions better than anything else, and I'll just mention this quickly. I think we're all aware of all the different innovative attempts to create affordability in housing, right? We have, we saw the tiny home movement, containers, 3D printed homes out of concrete, which is all of these super cool approaches. You have blockable, all these different approaches to the affordability crisis. The challenge is, and it's interesting. Well, let me ask you, what makes housing unaffordable? The land or the improvement?
I'd say it's mostly the improvement, but that, what does the crowd think? Anybody agree, disagree?
Well, here's the interesting thing, or go for it. I don't want to cut the responses off. Are y'all okay with the interesting thing is what makes housing unaffordable is the land. It's actually the cost of land, which is prohibitive, not the improvement. So all of these technology innovations, are they going after what? Are they improving the cost of land, or are they trying to bring down the cost of the improvement?
Yeah,
it's all the improvement. It's not the cost of land, because then again, how would you bring down the cost of land? It kind of is what it is. So manufactured housing really addresses that, in that it can give somebody home ownership without requiring them to bear the cost of the land. They lease the land, they own the home. There's no other type of apartments don't address that, because yes, you don't have to bear the cost of the land, but you don't own your home. And there's a difference there. So manufactured housing is really uniquely, mobile home parks is uniquely situated and uniquely positioned to really serve people who need affordability, because it bifurcates ownership of the part that is the challenging part to buy, but gives you ownership of the part that is not challenging to buy.
Now, you mentioned mobile home parks, and you also mentioned manufactured housing. I know there's some subtle differences there. Is there a preference one way or the other for you?
Well, so all mobile homes are manufactured. It's a manufactured process. It's a pre-manufactured process. So they're all considered manufactured housing. Most of our communities, we call them manufactured housing communities, because, and I can show you real quick, if it would be helpful, and without you having to, if you think it would be helpful to see like an image or a visual of what we call mobile home parks, would that be helpful to kind of put your eyes on what we're talking about? Okay. Because when I say mobile home park, I know what you're thinking. and the fact that you're still on here is just pure grace, given that image you have in your head. So anyway, so let me show you real quick. I'll give you kind of let me give you an example here. Bear with me. But while I'm doing this, I'll kind of give a couple of different things. So we don't own RV parks. We own, obviously, mobile home parks. We also do not want to own the homes. We just want to own the land. So for example, I'll pop this up really quickly for you. This is what we call a flyover video. Okay, let's see if this works.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Can everybody see kind of that?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. I'm not going to play it so you don't have to, have the herky jerky kind of thing going on. But this is 315 spaces. All of those homes you see, we don't own any of them. Those are all owned by the residents. And to the extent that they own them free and clear, their only obligation for the land that it sits on is about $350 to $400 a month, depending on where in the community it sits. So if they own their home, they have to pay $300 a month. Now, what would they have to pay if they bought an acre of land or 2 acres of land or 3 acres of land? Well, they would pay much more than that. So the point is, that's part of the reason it's affordable. Now, this is not the nicest park we own. This is not the ugliest park we own, but I would imagine it's far nicer than what you had envisioned, to the point where you might say, well, I can see myself owning something like that. And I'll just say, we're really proud of what we own. And the name of our, the brand that we operate under is called JRB Communities. Jamie, Ryan, Brian, those are the 3 principals. I'm the R, my wife is the J, and Brian's the B. Kind of the brand promises, if we wouldn't live there, we won't let you, right? So this isn't slumlording. This isn't, obviously you can kind of see, I'm not above at all living in any of our places. And I'd be happy to, if that was the best fit for our family. So point being is, that's one. Let me see if I can just kind of pop up another one. This one's an interesting one. This one's one we bought probably 2-3 years ago. This one's in Washington, D.C. This is 266 spaces. Right now, 265 are occupied. We have 1 vacancy that'll be filled next month. This is about 45 minutes from D.C. Nicest property. When we bought it, the lot rents were about $550 a month. Market was about $800 a month. And so now the lot rents here are about $625 a month. We bought this for about $30 million, we think, so I'll just say, completely devalue this opinion. But we think this would probably trade for north of $50 million at this point. And we've owned it for about 2 years. We think there's a lot of room to go on this asset. So, so like this video, this picture, you look at it and say, okay, well, that's nice. Well, the drive here drives me nuts. This has already been blacktopped and resurfaced since we bought it, because that's not the quality of what we want over time. So as I show you this, I cringe. I wish I had a better image or a more recent image. So the point is, we operate a nice place. We're constantly improving. So that's another one. I'll give you another one and give you an example of something that might be helpful. So this is a 153 space mobile home park we bought in Gillette, Wyoming in, I think, call it mid 2018 off of memory. We bought it for $7.5 million. It appraised about a year ago for $10.3 million. And a couple of different things. So back to that NOI dollar that we talked about at the top. Okay, so what are some of the ways we add NOI and value to our properties? Well, there's market-based, which is kind of the obvious one. You buy a property and you just raise the rents over time because the market allows you to do so, right? Passing inflation on to the customer or whatever, however you want to look at it. But there's a couple of other, I'll say, forced appreciation methods, which is one, probably not all that obvious. I don't know if you can see my mouse on your screen.
Yep.
But kind of down, okay. But right where my mouse is, that's an empty pad. Okay, that's an empty space. The seller did not fill it. Don't ask me why. People do crazy things. But as you fly through the park, you'll notice a couple of vacant pads at the time of acquisition. And so all of those vacant pads have now been filled and there's homes sitting on them. So let's do the math really quickly here. So let's say lot rents are 500, say OPEX expense ratio, your operating expense ratio is, let's say, I'm going to go way high for negativity. Let's just say it's 40% off of $500 of lot rent, which is $300 a month of NOI, net operating income, times 12 is $3,600 for the year. This property would easily trade at a sub 5 cap today, but let's say 5 cap, so 20 times $3,600 a year is $72,000, right? So every time a home hits a pad, the lot rent value being negative is 72,000. Right. So if you have 10 pads, that's $720,000 of value creation there. There's other line items of revenue. You can't really notice this, but this is kind of where you get picky. You kind of get when you've done something for a long time, you find yourself getting a little bit crotchety and picky about things that may not be obvious to others. So one thing that drove us nuts that you're looking at right now, okay, is you see all the cars in each driveway? That drives me nuts, because does that make the property look clean, or does it make it look like a jumbled mess? Got cars piled here, piled there, different directions. It's what makes it's just sloppy. So we put in, this was a unique thing with this park. For whatever reason, there were RVs and extra, anyway, lots of cars and vehicles. So what we did is we put in a policy where you can only have 2 cars per home. And then what we did, and you can't see this really all that well from this angle. Let me see if I can find a shot that better shows you this. You kind of can see it over here, this little lot with all the stuff parked over here, kind of the campers and over there. Well, that was our property that we bought, our lot that people just parked their crap on, and no fee was charged. So what we did is we actually blacktopped, we paved the whole area, put fences around it, lights, gate access, striped 100 stripes, parking spots, each numbered, and we charge. We put in the 2-car policy and then gave them a place to store it, which also generated revenue. And so I believe the last report I saw, about 70 of the 100 are filled and are paying. But what it also did is it cleaned up the look and feel of the park, while also generated revenue that added value. So it's kind of a twofer. We do a lot of other things, like you'll see these tough sheds. So what you noticed, I think, in the video a minute ago, is there wasn't a lot of riffraff, crap everywhere, bicycles, rusted cars. Obviously, we don't put up with that. So we have we manage to a standard, and to folks who want to treat their neighbor like themselves and kind of contribute to a community that is quality and clean and welcoming and all of that, then we'll get along just fine. But what we have is we have rules in all of our communities. And so what we don't tolerate is the stuff, the crap everywhere. Okay. And I don't need to go any further than that. We just don't tolerate it. So if somebody wants to store their stuff, we also build storage into our mobile home parks. And the way we do this, like in this sense, sometimes we'll actually do the roll off, we'll actually do kind of containers, and we'll do different solutions. It just depends on the park. But in this one, what we did is we did a tough shed program, where if you want a tough shed, you just basically check a box, and we, the park, will buy a tough shed for, call it $2,000, and we'll put it in for you and install it for you. So you just check the box, it's $2,000, we install it. Now you have a tough shed for all of your stuff to go into. And then 1% of the cost of the item is then added onto your lot rent. So that would be $20 in lot rent increase based on that. So you do that, there's no added expense, $20, that's $240. At a 5 cap, that's $4,800. So we more than double our money, plus the income and the cash flow that'll come in. So it's we think, a really good investment. So this property, we've increased the NOI by filling vacancies, by adding other line items of revenue, and also by pushing rents in line with market. So thought I'd pull up a property and give you an actual example rather than hypothetical.
Nice. Very good. So no, this is great. I guess one question, you talked a little bit about where pricing is on assets that you've had for several years. Obviously, us and a lot of folks here that are in the multifamily space, we do syndication. We're looking at 5 to 7 year, exit strategies for the most part. What does an exit strategy look for your parks in general?
So our way of looking at it is far more simple, I think, in a good way, in that it starts with the premise that there's only so many good assets. Mm-hmm. So if you take the time to identify, you take the risk in acquiring, you take the effort in turning around the asset and adding value, it doesn't make any sense to us to sell it. It's like, hey, I've got a really good thing, I never want to see it again.
Yeah.
So to me, it doesn't make sense to sell. Now, somebody will say, well, what if you have a lot of value in the asset? Well, to me, there's a lot of ways to capitalize on unrealized gains other than just to sell. And I think if I'm trying to be helpful without making kind of exhaustively true absolute statements. I think there's risk in a lot of models today, in that a lot of models today presume that what has been the case will be the case. And so you just draw a straight line and you say, hey, we're going to do this. I presume, I think the next 10 years will look drastically different than the last 10 years. So then you add tax policy and you add a lot of things on top of that. I'm not quite sure the best solution will be to sell in 5, 7, 8, 9 years. I'm not sure that that's the best. So I would be really hesitant to commit to selling today as part of the defined strategy, because I think some people by mandate will have to sell and it not make sense to sell. And that'll cause a lot of friction and issue. So beyond that, it's not our desire to. So I'll give you, let me see if I can I'm going to pull something else up for you just to be helpful, hopefully. So we close on a property. This will serve, if it pulls up, this will serve as a good example, I think. But we are set to close on a property now this Friday. It was supposed to be on Thursday. I'm just going to pull this up real quick here. Okay. So we're closing on a property we've been working on for quite some time in Alexandria, Virginia. It's a storage asset. It's about 100,000 feet, right? It's about, call it a mile, less than a mile from Crystal City. And if you're familiar with Crystal City, Amazon identified Crystal City for HQ2, and Amazon bought Crystal City. I think it's one of the first times a publicly traded company has purchased an entire city for $10 billion, bought the city. And they're renaming it. But the point is, they cannot build housing fast enough. And so we're fortunate enough to be able to buy this storage facility in Alexandria. Now, when I say we still haven't closed it, we're working on closing it on Friday, but we expect to do so. So to give you, these are mock-ups. These are renderings for what it'll look like when we're done with it. Okay, so that's our brand, Mini U Storage for storage. So point being, significant, sizable asset in an unbelievable location. Okay, we think there's a lot of opportunity to add value to that asset over time. That market, just for a couple points, right now, current demand for storage in Alexandria is about 9 feet per person. Current supply is about 4 feet per person. So if demand's 9 and supply's 4, why doesn't supply increase to meet demand? Well, there's barriers to entry. Obviously, there's inefficiencies in the market. And the point is, their priority is housing, not storage. And so we like moated assets. And we believe Alexandria and storage, this asset is moated, which we like. So all of that to say, so you've got a property within a mile or two of the White House in a market that's growing like mad with high barriers to entry. Remind me why it makes sense to sell that, right? I'm going to keep drumming this because it doesn't make any sense. So our entire model is to purchase property in the present based on 50% leverage, which is incredibly conservative. We can get 70, 80% LTC, loan to cost, but we choose 50% leverage because generally speaking, if you buy quality assets in quality markets and manage them half decently for a long time, generally good things happen, as a general statement. So the key is don't mess it up. One of the ways people mess it up is through debt. They take either too much or the wrong type of debt. And what I mean by that is CMBS, conduit debt, we try to steer clear of, and there's a whole discussion on that. So the point is, we go in, we buy that asset, let's say 50% loan to cost, we add value to the asset over time. So you have this unrealized gain. So if you have unrealized gain, there's a lot of ways to realize it. One is to sell the asset and pay capital gains, which Biden has said what? he wants to tax you 43.6%. Right? He wants to take away long-term capital gains. He's actually trying to retroact it to April of this year. Right? So, and then you say, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to 1031 exchange. He said he wants to remove the 1031 exchange to force you to pay the 43.6. So I'm just saying I'm not saying he'll do it. Don't know. There's headwinds. But regardless if you 1031 or not, there's likely going to be a much higher tax on capital gains. And I think this is going to be the trend for the next decade. I think it's the human condition. We hit one guardrail and then we go to the other. And so the only question is, what guardrail are we leaving? Which one are we heading to? With the full understanding that one day we'll be back to the guardrail we left. Okay, we just kind of, and that's just the way it works. But in short, the when you look at that asset, as we add value to the asset, the loan to value goes down. Your return on equity goes down. So at the same time, if you continue to add value, add cash flow to the asset, your ROI is going up, your ROE is going down, your LT, loan to value, is going down. Does that make sense to everybody? Why I'm saying those things? Okay. So let's assume just as an assumption, let's assume roughly the first 8% of distributable income from the asset is shielded by depreciation. I'm not even talking cost segregation or anything else, but let's just say standard depreciation shields the first 8%. So over time, as my cash flow goes up, I'm now earning more than 8%. I'm now at 9 or 10 or 11 or 12 or 13 or 14 or 15. So I'm becoming less tax efficient as I pop my head like a gopher out of the hole above the coverage of depreciation. At the same time, my ROE is falling and my loan to value is falling. And I've got this massive equity position that's accumulating in this asset. So what I'd rather do is refinance the asset, take the loan to value, which may be in the 30s, take it up to 60, take the cash out, which resets my ROE to my ROI. I then have to make the payment on the debt, which drops my distribution back under the coverage of depreciation. And I pay no tax on the amount I take out of the property because you don't pay tax on borrowed money. So to a degree, I pay no tax, so I can go back to paying no tax. And then you rinse and repeat over many, many years to various degrees as the market does what the market does. And again, I've talked too long without breathing.
That's good. I don't know if anybody else has got questions, but for example, one of the things that I think would be, so we talked a little bit about that exit strategy or not exiting or really just kind of resetting the clock. How does that play with your investor channel? I understand you're doing these under a fund, if I'm not mistaken. What does that look like for them?
So to me, I'll make two comments from different perspectives because I don't know where everybody's at on this call. But to me, on the fund side, for me, what I notice, there's a lot of people who are starting out in the space and they gear their fund structure around what the market wants or what they think the market wants or what might be an easier sell to the market. But oftentimes what is the easiest sell is not the best long-term, ironically, potentially for the market. So it's like my kids want to eat candy all day long. I mean, not literally, but I'm sure I have one or two that would if I gave them the chance. I don't know because they don't even have that chance, but I would imagine. And Trip, who's on, I'm sure if I left a bowl out, my 2-year-old would probably pound it. That's what they want. Probably not the best thing for them, right? So, and that's not to equate investors with kids, but don't go there. But you get the point. Sometimes what people want is that may or may not be the best. So a lot of times sponsors will create kind of quick turn fund vehicles with a buy, fix, and sell with high IRR projections, which I'll just mention really quickly. We do not offer projections in any of our funds. And the presumption is what? You have no expectation? False. We do have models. The question is, should I use them for marketing? Knowing full well that what percentage of all models will be wrong? By the way, 100% of all models will be wrong. So why would I use would I hand you a PPM that is 100% false? So why would I give you a portion of a PPM, call it marketing, and somehow that changes the compelling nature of it? You see, to me, I don't get it. So we don't use models for us, we draw the focus on the team. Who are we? What do we do? If you trust us, if you think we're competent, then great. If you don't, no amount of models will change that fact, right? So I'm getting to your question, I promise. So I haven't forgotten it. I'm just trying to, maybe cover little things along the way. But in short, we think the model that we've described gives us the flexibility. We think it's the best model. We think it's flexible. But we also know that not everybody will want to own property for 20 or 30 years, right? So in short, kind of the plan is to go to investors somewhere around year 10 for this present fund. And basically in NAV terms and net asset value terms, say, hey, this is what your investment is worth to you. Here's what your units are worth. And then the question is, what do you want to do? You want to sell all of them, sell none of them, sell some, keep some. So in short, we want to give them the ability to stay if they want, leave if they want, or both if they want, at their discretion, at that time, to the extent that can be accomplished. That's the goal.
Yes.
Because the last thing is, let's say, I'll give you even a better example. So there's 3 principles in our firm, and the third principle is a gentleman named Brian Don, and Brian has been at it since 1970 and has many assets that are still owned, purchased in 82, 83, so on and so forth, where, a couple $100,000 was put in and several million have been paid out. And he jokingly says, and joking only, there's truth in humor, right? So there's some seriousness to this and saying, listen, if I ever sell these properties, I'm going to have to hide. I'll no longer be able to come to the country club. I can't play golf. I'll get clubbed in the hall, right? Because you've got assets that have been open for 20 to 30 years, owned for 20, 30 years, are fully depreciated, are kicking off infinite returns on present capital. And now you decide to sell so I can stop receiving an infinite return, pay tax to stop receiving an infinite return, and actually have to pay recapture to stop. Yeah, it makes no sense. So most of those folks, they're never going to sell. They'll leave it to their kids, who hopefully don't mess it up. But I think we all know 7% of wealth makes it to G3. 93% of wealth is lost by the 3rd generation. So there's a pretty significant chance that generation, as soon as the patriarch passes, they'll click the sell button, because that's unfortunately what people do.
It's unfortunate. Awesome. Now on the lender side, and I think this may be the last question, just based on time. On the lender side, what you mentioned 50-50 is kind of your leverage. Is there a maximum? And is there, within that maximum, is it different than you normally would see on a multifamily type asset?
In terms of possibility, no. We can obtain 85%, loan to cost today, maybe even higher today. I don't even know, because we're not interested in pushing those thresholds. But it's not a capability standpoint. It's just a decision of what is best. What is on a risk adjusted basis, what is the best decision? Now, there's a part of me that says, okay, if I'm buying a $30 million asset, if I can get 90% financing, I only need to raise $3 million of private capital, of contributed equity to purchase the asset, 27 million of financing. Boy, that sounds a lot easier than having to raise 15 million of capital on the same asset. Which one would you rather do, find 3 or find 15? But my comfort and convenience has no bearing on what is better, right? There's only one better. It's not better for me. It's what is the best, period. Me excluded, right? From that equation. So for us, and I'll ask you, which one do you think is better? Do you feel more comfortable with over the long run? If you're buying a good asset in a good market and your goal is to own it for a very long time, what do you think has lower risk, 50% or 90%? Leverage.
Conservative is better.
50%. Yeah. And this is not exhaustively true. this is a very rough, and it depends by asset class, depends by asset, depends by lender, but as a very rough statement, in storage and mobile home parks, your break-even occupancy rate to a degree, and again, this varies, but is roughly 10% north of your leverage rate. So if you're 80% leverage, you need to be roughly 90% occupied to break even. Everybody feel comfortable with that? Sleeping good? You better hope bumps don't happen, because you're like, oh my goodness, you're pretty thin, right? Your margin of safety, using kind of value investing terminology, is pretty thin. Now, if I'm 50% leverage and my break-even occupancy is, call it plus or minus 60% occupied, I'm very comfortable, very, very comfortable. And so that's the thing. Back to your question, can we get high loan to value or loan to cost at acquisition? We can. We choose not to. Now, is 55 better than 50? There's a whole debate we can have on that. But what is I think pretty well decided is 50 is less risky than 90. Now you can argue, well, the returns are so much higher at 90. Sure, and that's where the young guys who are coming up, they're redlining a lot of different things, and as long as cap rates are compressing and liquidity is all over the place, then that model works. But all I'm saying is that may not be sustainable.
Yeah. Fantastic. All right, I don't know if anybody has questions at this point. I've asked a lot of questions, but if anybody has questions on this, going once.
You may have more questions now than you started, which to a degree would be a good use of our time together.
Yeah, no, this has been good for me. Oh, did I hear a question? Go ahead, Quinn.
Yeah, Ryan, I got a quick question, because I know that the audience here is mainly multi guys, and when we look at direct assets, direct investing, or we're looking at different sponsors and operators, my question would be about, generally we're talking like assessing the market. And so we're used to kind of the intuitive approach of assessing, the markets from a high level. For multi, how is that different? How should we be approaching it differently, either as a direct or indirect investor for mobile?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. It depends also on asset class between mobile home parks or manufactured housing and storage. I would say we're more picky around storage on the markets, a little bit more picky. So, for example, we may buy in a secondary market for mobile home parks, but self-storage we would not. We really want to buy in major MSAs and established communities with increasing density, increasing incomes, increasing kind of job creation, economics, business moving in. So we're a little bit more picky on the storage side. So I guess in terms of kind of broad level, kind of high level overview, it really revolves around contemplations of risk. So I'll kind of cover that. And there's different risks for different asset classes. So for example, for mobile home parks, you have regulatory risks, which can include state tenant landlord acts. So rent control. So number one, we wouldn't be interested in owning in California, Oregon, Washington. North Carolina, surprisingly, is incredibly liberal. Who knew? New York. You won't struggle to find any deal flow out of New York right now, pouring out of New York. It's like one in 5 deals is either New York or Cook County. And I wish I could program my email to auto delete, but I'm not that smart yet. But yeah, we won't touch anything in Cook County because regulatory risk. Cook County has a kind of a programmatic approach to taxation, where their goal, really what they do, I don't want to say their goal, it's what they do. They really are, they jack the taxes every year pretty significantly on business owners. So you have to hire a tax attorney to fight and contest, and you usually win. But their gotcha is the people who can't hire attorneys are forced to pay. And so it's this part of your business in Cook County that's just, so if anything's in Cook County, we say no. And we're not by any means the only one. New York, no. Then you have other kind of layers of risk. You have kind of socioeconomic risk with, call it the New England states. It's a very broad brush, but I think you get the picture. They have declining populations of people, which is negative. To kind of, you have acts of God risk, which doesn't mean avoid Florida because there's potential hurricanes. It's just, every property we have flood, fire, wind, hail. We have, we're insured. We also have business continuity coverage for at least 1 year on every asset. On the storage side, we require 100% of all of our customers have insurance, whether it's through a third party, call it Bader, or they add it to their homeowner's policy. If any property we own in Florida is, let's say, damaged by a hurricane, we're not responsible for the contents. We have replacement coverage, and then we have business continuity coverage for the loss of revenue while we replace the asset. So we're heavily insured. We have something else that you can call, I don't know, we've kind of made it up internally, but we call it segmentation risk or stratification risk. So you'll notice if you look at where we own and where we don't own, there's a huge bald spot, for lack of a better term, in the southeastern part of the country, mainly kind of geographic, but kind of southern Alabama, to a degree, panhandle of Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, western Tennessee, and then Arkansas, kind of a giant, you picture that region. And we call it, for mobile home parks specifically, stratification risk, in that if I'm buying a mobile home park in Enterprise, Alabama, okay, which is kind of near Fort Rucker, so to speak, but call it, I don't know why that came to mind. So I'll just Enterprise, Alabama.
Picking on the guy from Alabama, Ryan?
Say what? Yeah.
Picking on the guy from Alabama?
I'm looking at you. Yeah. But when and this isn't, again, exhaustively true. There are exceptions to this, but as a general statement, a lot of the area that I described, you can buy a mobile home park there and the lot rents may be $200 a month, which is incredibly low against the national average. And there's a reason why. The reason why is you can also buy a house, again, generally speaking, for $100,000 plus or minus, and you can be all in on a monthly basis for $400 to $500 a month. So if I'm charging $200 for a mobile home for the dirt, and you can go get a stick-built house for $500, I don't see a clear path where I can take my $200 over a long period of time to $500 or $600, because I need all of these other product types to get out of the way. So I need single family to grow. I need apartments to grow, to create the opportunity for me to grow. So that's a lot of nested if statements, which I don't like. As a comparison, like picking another one, Austin, Texas, right? The average single family house is about $2,500 a month. The average apartment's about $2,200 a month. And the average mobile home park's about $600 to $700 a month in that market. Right. So I don't have to worry about everything getting out of the way. It's already out of the way. I see a clear path, right? There's nothing even close. Even apartments can be cut in half and I still have separation, right? So I like that margin of safety, so to speak. So that's in the South, kind of the Southeastern. That doesn't include Florida. Florida has its own issues. So for mobile home parks, and this is surprisingly not widely known. It's frightening. But pretty much every lot in the state of Florida is governed by a prospectus that's filed at the state. So if you buy a 100-unit mobile home park in Florida, you actually have to research 100 prospectuses, which define what you can and cannot do with rent for that lot, right? So you wouldn't believe how many people own mobile home parks in Florida. And I've asked them, I'm like, did you do the prospectus review before? And they're like, what, the what review? Yeah. Yeah. It's like that, hold my beer, anyway, I'm not a beer drinker. I don't know why I said that, but the point, chalk it up to 9 o'clock at night. But the point being is Florida has some interesting wrinkles and some nuances. Then more specific to the asset, we want to buy 150 units or more on mobile home parks. We, no private utilities, only public utilities. We don't want to own a lot of the homes, so we don't want to buy a park where 90% of them are tenant, the tenants are renting them. They're called park-owned homes, where, the model then is, the thought is, well, we're going to go in, fix them up, sell them back to them. But a lot of times you look at the homes that have been rented for a long time and they're just beat to heck. And anybody who wants to live in that isn't probably the tenant I want long-term, because I want somebody to want something nice, right? I want, if they settled for that and said, yeah, I'd love to live there, I'd question their motives, because it's just, that's not what we want to provide on a long-term basis. So it's a long slog. And so when this, I hope this isn't considered rambling. I'm just trying to kind of cover important parts, but this is kind of the way we view, at least the mobile home park business, is there's really two approaches. You buy a really hairy deal and work over time to shave it, or make it better. For us, we think if you buy a quality asset in a quality market, we think it's much easier to drive revenue growth, to drive NOI growth on an existing install base and an existing customer base that's already in place, and tweak and add to an existing base than it is to create the base to then be able to tweak. So, it's not to say there's not opportunities the other way. It's just on a risk-adjusted basis. It's more of a challenge, and it's certainly not scalable.
It's like a solid B class, huh?
Oh man, yeah, I've seen some that would be a compliment for an F. Yeah, I mean, go
Ryan,
down OBT. I mean, anyway.
Do you develop? I saw the storage looked like a rendering of a new development, but do you I mean, you bring in housing for the infill lots, but I mean, I'm talking about starting from scratch.
We do. So, let's see, here we go. So that's on your screen. This is a storage facility in Parker, Colorado. It's 760 units. This we bought the land, developed it, and built the facility. So this was from the ground up. So we do development. It's currently, that's not, so there's a couple of things. So we will build from the ground up. We will also buy, let's see if I can stop this and show you a couple of other examples. We'll also buy assets where there's redevelopment opportunities, which the one that I shared earlier in Alexandria, that's one of those. This isn't that, but that one is. The one in Alexandria is just really well located. Couldn't be better located, couldn't be more poorly managed, and probably hasn't seen a cleaning solution since the year of my birth. The doors, if you can imagine, I mean, we all have expectations about storage, right? The roll-up doors. Well, they have standard doors on all of their units. There's not a single roll-up in the whole place. So we're gonna go in, we're gonna gut it, we're gonna optimize, we're gonna reconfigure. Another thing is we don't want customers to have to turn more than 2 times to access their unit. Okay, the last thing you want to do is, if you're interior, to have to turn 2, 3, 4 times. That's dicey with a bunch of stuff. So we have a limit of two turns. So we have to re-optimize to make sure that everybody can access units. The unit mix isn't right. There's no door. So we're going to go in and we're going to gut the inside, reconfigure it, climatize it. We're doing a new shell. I can't really speak too much on what's happening around that property, but I'll just say in 2-3 years, it'll look drastically different. So there's a lot going on around that property. So part of our agreement is to do a new shell exterior to blend with the community that's going in. Now there's other examples. This is one that we built from the ground up. This is in Aurora, Colorado. One of the things we liked about this property is they imposed a moratorium against the construction of new storage facilities after we got approval for ours. So that sounds like a moat to me, which we liked. This property is a property we have in Las Vegas, Nevada. We bought this last September. This is in Fund 7, our prior fund. And it's probably hard to make out, but there you go. So really, this is near Summerlin, if you're familiar with Summerlin. If any of us were to move to Vegas, we'd all probably live in Summerlin. If you ever go on Jeopardy, you may like knowing that It was the first master plan community in the US designed by Howard Hughes, Summerlin was. So really nice, neat place to live. This is right out the front of it. We like it for a lot of reasons. So our property line, if you look at the restaurant here on the corner, the property line excludes that or that kind of square corner parcel. The car wash is ours. So this is a 1970s bay. It's just not optimal. So we're going to tear down this building, tear down the car wash, and next month we're going to start constructing a 30,000 square foot 3-story building right on the main frontage, which will provide about another, obviously 30,000 feet, but that equates to about 300 rentable units, which we think we can rent. It'll give us high visibility on the main road and give the older facility the appearance of new from the customer facing view, which we like. The other thing we like about this asset is over time, you'll see, well, I can't zoom in, but you kind of can see the RV parking, kind of the adult toy parking here under this covered portion and in the back. So if we're right about this market and this asset over time, we can slowly take out 1 or 2 of those covered parking areas and build additional storage and kind of internally add value to the asset over time. And that's something we also like, because we like assets in good locations that we can expand over time in that way. So long answer to your question, but we will do, we will to various degrees redevelop or engage in various construction projects, depending on kind of the what and the where. The one thing we haven't done and are not considering is developing a mobile home park from the ground up.
Hey, Ryan, thank you so much for your time tonight. This has been very insightful. In the storage side, do you have your own management team that manages the properties? When you go in and buy a property, do you set up a management team for how you're going to manage it, or do you find someone locally to manage it underneath here? How do you guys how do you guys manage the properties?
So we're entirely vertically integrated. So we manage all of our assets internally. We do not, and we do not hire our services out. And there's an economic reason, but that's the short. This is our storage brand. So mini U storage. So you can go on, see locations, rent a unit, pay your bill, download, you can digitally sign, rent a unit online, get an app, user ID, password, download the app, log into the app, drive up to the unit, wave your phone in front of the gate. It goes up touchless and access your unit. So, but all that being said, we do not like the kiosk model. It's a clever way to raise capital today. You say, hey, we're technology enabled real estate. We run entirely with kiosks, so you don't need human beings. So anyway, it's a nice kind of, you're triggering all the buzzwords, right? And I'm not saying one day it won't be a model. It's not today, because I will tell you, if you need anything on site, you are going to want a what? A kiosk or a person? A person. So anyway, point being is we do use technology, but we don't use technology to replace the human component, which we actually think gives us an advantage. One little tidbit on that, all of our managers are to advocate for the customer. So if you ever walk into the office and you're hot for whatever reason, it's their job to take your position, not oppose your position. We've all been there where we just want to be heard and felt like somebody agrees with us. And so it's, you go into the office, they are on your side. Even if it's against us, they're on your side. And they advocate to corporate, and it's corporate that says yes or no to whatever the issue is. And they can be mad at us, but at least you feel heard by the person in the office. But to answer your question, we often don't it's kind of a crapshoot, meaning we don't always, I'll go back to that Las Vegas property. So the Las Vegas property I just showed you with the bays and this, all of that. When Brian, Jamie, and I first walked that property before, obviously long before acquisition, we walked it with the manager at the time. We went to the back of the property, and by one of the main entrance doors, there was a panel that was heavily dented. I mean, significantly dented. And we asked him, we said, well, how long's that been dented? He goes, 5-6 years. So in that moment, we're like, not it. If you're not twitching, right? If you're not twitching at the sight of that, not it. So the point is we always, for the most part, we require the seller to terminate the managers prior to closing, so we don't absorb that wrongful termination risk. That's on them. So they're to terminate the managers prior to closing. If they want to then reapply based on the merit of their resume, they can, and they'll be considered amongst many. And then if they are, they'll be hired. But regardless, you could have been with that asset for 20 years. There's a very different way that we do things, right? We have a very specific way of operating. Okay, it's not about, well, I know the asset better than anyone. That's great, but we do things different. So we have a team of rovers that we're called rovers. You generally husband and wife, doesn't have to be, but generally 50, 60-year-olds that have professional capacity. They want to be active, but they really don't want to punch a clock for corporate America. So anytime we make an acquisition, we'll send a rover team to receive the asset, even if it's the same manager. They will then train that new manager on the way we do things for about 2 weeks. And when they're up to speed, then they'll leave and go to wherever else we send them for whatever task we have for them there. If it's an asset that we acquire and the manager isn't staying, then the rover team will take possession of the asset. They will actually be the manager. They will advertise, they will interview, hire the managers, and then train the managers. And then when they're good, they're gone to the next. And then all of our assets, we physically walk all of our assets at least 2 to 3 times a year. And that's not including our executive VPs of management, which are constantly walking the property for the most part every month. So every day on site, monthly from EVPs, and then Jamie, myself, and Brian physically walk at least 2 times a year. And there's other supports that's a very limited view, but anyway.
Well, Ryan, you gave us a bonus today. We went well over our time, so I really appreciate you spending that time with us and
Sure.
really rolling with whatever questions I or some of the other folks asked, and really appreciate that. Not everybody is comfortable in that setting, and clearly it's because you've been doing this for a long time. From my perspective, obviously, and a lot of the folks here, we focus on multifamily, but what I tell people is focus on where you can invest where it makes sense. And obviously, based on what you've said and based on me studying it, there are some very good opportunities in that space that you work in. So I guess before I go to some announcements, where can people get a hold of you? I don't know if you put your information on the chat, or if you want to just shout out your website again one more time, whatever works for you.
Sure. Yeah. And if you struggle with sleep, NyQuil works, or feel free to call me. Either will solve and cure what ails you. But I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and thanks again for putting this on. So my email is ryan@elevationcg.com, and that's elevation, C as in Charlie, G as in group.com. And then our website is elevationfund.com.
Well, Ryan, thanks a lot. I just want to let the folks know for next week, or correction, next month, we have Brad Young that's coming in to talk insurance. Really tense subject there, right? I mean, but it is hurricane season close here in Florida, and it's obviously something that we need to pay attention to, and not just multifamily, but really any commercial asset. It's a really big piece to play, and we got to make sure we're covered there. Sounds like you're very well covered in that space.
Yep, grateful to be. Never as covered as you want to be. But
You want to sleep at night. So I think that we'll leave it there, folks. It's been a great discussion. Thanks for joining me and Ryan.